Chapter 3, again. First time we hear from Job. My chapter heading there just basically says Job speaks. This is when he begins to speak a little bit about from his perspective, what's going on in his life. So in light of all that's happened, we shouldn't be surprised that this particular portion, this chapter 3, is a lament. It's Job lamenting the things that have taken place in his life, and as a result of all that's transpired, his frame of reference, his perspective is he's pretty challenged. He's devastated. He's discouraged. He's dismayed, to say the least. And I think if somehow we would try to put ourselves in his shoes in some way, we would find ourselves feeling somewhat the same way. So notice how it unfolds in chapter 3. It breaks down, I think, in 3 sections. Verses 1 through 10, verses 11 through 19, and verses 20 through 26. And we want to just read through those and see what we can discover as to what Job is saying here in relation to what's taking place in his life. So in verses 1 through 10, I think 1 through 10, I think we can just kind of summarize it in Job curses the day he was born. That's what he says. Look at verse 1. After this, Job opened his mouth and he cursed the day of his birth. So cursed would be the opposite of blessed, right? So he cursed the day of his birth. And then in verse 2 it just simply says, he said, which just as a side note, in the NIV Bible, this is the shortest verse in the Bible. What is the shortest verse in the Bible we always learn in Sunday school?
Jesus wept.
Jesus wept. How many letters is that?
And
how many is this? So this is the shortest verse in the NIV translation. Hey, strike that from the record. Let's just move on. So Job curses the day he was born. His suffering has led him to ask. His suffering has led him to make statements. He's asking if he could be redacted, if he could be removed, if the time of his birth could be removed from the chronicles of human history. So if his friends can't recognize him because of the physical impact, I think the weight of the statement that we're going to see, or the statements that he makes in 1 through 10, he's suffering. He is definitely experiencing some traumatic times, emotionally, physically. It's begun to weigh on him, everything that's taken place. So let's just kind of read through this and see what he says about cursing the day of his birth. Verse 3. May the day of my birth perish, and the night it was said, a boy is born. So he's asking if God, could you just remove that? That's his point of view. That's his perspective. That day, look at verse 4, that day, may it turn to darkness. Just the opposite of what we see in Genesis 1:3. And the Lord said, let there be light. So think about the metaphors that are going to be used as we read through here. Poetic language is what we're talking about here. The metaphors of darkness are the metaphors of night and day, darkness and light. Darkness would speak to death, light would speak to what? Life. That day, Lord, may it turn to darkness, or would you uncreate what was created on that night? May the God above not care about it. May no light shine upon it again. No light come to surface on what happened that night. What happened that night? There was a boy that was born. And he's in the midst of where he finds himself. This is his response. Verse 6, that night made thick darkness. And notice how the metaphors begin to pile up. Or here in verse 5, made darkness and deep shadow claim it once more. So we've got darkness, we've got deep shadows. May the clouds settle over it. When settles over anything, what happens? Light begins to be covered up. And then he says, may blackness, what? Overwhelm its light. The light of that day. The light of that day would have been the revelation of life on the day that he was born. That
John James says terrified.
Say what?
Terrified.
King James says terrified?
Yeah. May the blackness of the day terrified.
Terrified.
I don't know any Hebrew.
See, so what is the picture that we're seeing here? He is in such turmoil, such agony, both physically and emotionally. He wished he'd never been born. He's at a point where, from his perspective, he wishes he had never been born. That night may thick darkness seize it. May it not be included among the days of the year, nor entered in any days of the month. His date be removed from the calendar. May that night be barren. May no shout of joy be heard in it. What does the shout of joy refer to? It refers to verse 3, that a boy was born. Not to imply that boys are more important than girls, but for the boy to be born, the shout would be that the family tree, the line, the bloodline would continue on when the boy is born. And we're thinking about what, maybe 2,000 years before the Common Era, 2000 BC. Some would think when this period of time that Job perhaps is experiencing this was. So may no shout of joy be heard in it. May those who curse days curse that day. Now who are they? Professional soothsayers? Those who could be hired to perhaps somehow curse people or days. You think about Numbers chapter 22, who we introduced to there. Balaam. Wasn't Balaam one that was sought out to curse the children of Israel? So may those who make a profession of cursing things, even have them join me in cursing the day of my birth. That's how difficult his circumstance is. Those who are ready to rouse the Leviathan. The Leviathan was, as kind of a mythological creature in reference to a great sea monster that was always responsible for chaos in the sea. Verse 9, may its morning stars become dark. May it wait for daylight in vain and not see the first rays of dawn. So if there is no dawn, there's no light. I think poetically speaking, he's saying there would have been no light. And it's supported by verse 10. For it did not shut the doors of the womb on me. He had wished that the doors had been shut, and we'll see that in just a minute, in order to hide trouble from his eyes. In his life, what is he experiencing? He's at the pinnacle of pain and suffering, and he has no understanding as to why. Because he is a man who was the priest of his family. He had great concern for his children. Concerned about their spiritual walk with God. And then these things begin to happen to him. So you have to ask the question, and it's raised oftentimes by others. Job at this point, this is his expression. How did Job feel? How would Job have felt prior to his present situation? Obviously he would have felt different. I'm sure he felt a lot different while prosperity and the blessing was coming. But, I think it would be something that we need to think about in our own heart and mind. If the unthinkable were to come into our life, how would we respond? Pray, Lord, that it never does. But yet, if it does, pray, Lord, that we respond in a way that honors the Lord. Job's main concern here throughout this book is going to be to keep his integrity, is to be a man who fears God, not because of any blessing, but fears God because of his great love for him and his desire to serve him. So that, so Job's present situation has brought him to a place where his faith is certainly being tested, and tested very deeply. So that's in verses 1 through 10. Job curses the day that he was born. But it changes just a little bit. The tone of the text here changes a little bit in verses 11 through 19. And what we see there as we read through the text is that Job begins to long for the grave. First he's saying, I wish I'd never been born, but what's reality? Reality is he's sitting there scraping sores and he's in pain. That's reality. So now he speaks in the context of longing for the grave, beginning in verse 11. Notice what he says, why did I not perish at birth and die as I came forth from the womb? You know, what is the age-old question? Why me, Lord? What, why is this happening to me? From Job's perspective, it appears that life is not worth living. If this is all there is, if this is what is in front of me, in his situation, what we've seen, sores from the soles of his feet to the top of his head, life is not worthy. He cursed the day that he was born. And now he's saying, why did I just not perish at birth and die as I came forth from the womb? And then in verse 12, why were there knees to receive me and breasts that I might be nursed? You think it's easy to think in the birthing process that the child is delivered through the knees, and through the knees the child is taken to the breast to find the sustenance that it needs. Why did that happen? Had it not happened, Job thinks he would have been in a better situation or circumstance, and that's what he's saying in verse 13. Had that not happened, in verse 12, he's saying now, I would be able to lie down. I would be able to lie down in peace. I would be asleep. I would be at rest. So in other words, he's speaking about the grave. He's speaking about, had verse 12 not taken place, this is where I'd be. Had I not been delivered through the knees and nursed by his mother, this is where he would be. And I think, again, from his perspective, he believes he would be in a better position. Verse 14, he's talking about others. He would be with kings and counselors of the earth, those who had come or had preceded him in life and preceded him in death, who built for themselves palaces now lying in ruins. Job was a wealthy man. I'm sure that upon a natural death, if he's thinking about a mausoleum type situation, his final resting place would probably have been prominent based upon his wealth. And oftentimes, those situations or those type of outlandish funeral. What do you call them? Mausoleums and crypts and things like that. Over a period of time, they, once that initial impact is gone of that person, or a generation or two later, they tend to go into ruins. I guess that's what he's talking about. And he says, I will be with rulers who had gold, who had filled their houses with silver. That's where he'd been had he had the opportunity to perish at birth. Verse 16, or why was I not hidden in the ground like a stillborn child? Like an infant who never saw the light of day. So again, he's saying, from his perspective, life is not worth living. In light of Job's circumstances, it just seems to me that he's thinking that death has to be better than the prospect of what is directly in front of him in the days ahead. Verse 17. There the wicked cease from turmoil. Perhaps the reference here that we're supposed, or the idea that we should see from the wicked ceasing from turmoil, not that they just stop causing, pain, sorrow, and suffering to those around him, but the wicked ceasing from turmoil. Perhaps the idea here is, unhappiness. The wicked who are just, can never find peace in their life. They're unhappy, they're filled with fear, and they act out. And he says, he would be there with those, and he would also be with the grave, where he are at rest, seeing that death would offer to him something that life has not in his current situation. In verse 18, captives also enjoy their ease in the grave. Once they no longer hear the slave driver shout, even the slave when he perishes, he's no longer accounted to the slave driver. So to Job, the grave is looking to be the better option at this point. The small and the great are there. The dead is no respecter of social standing. And the slave is freed from his master. When you think about the decline, we mentioned earlier, that as Job begins to speak, he's on this descent of being dismayed and discouraged. It really is. I think it's hard for us to wrap our minds around exactly what it is that he was experiencing and what exactly is being expressed to us through the writing of the author here, through the poetry that's being presented. But it is, it's a devastating situation, one that I know we would not wish upon even someone that we would see as an adversary to us, in light of all that's being said here. So, he's cursed the day that he died. He's longing for the grave. But in verses 20 through 26, he begins to talk about just the misery of life. He bemoans the misery of life. Perhaps it is that Job is thinking, what's the purpose of even going on? What's the purpose of even living? If I'm going to be in this situation, this condition, what is the purpose of living? But yet at the same time, we know that Job wants to maintain his integrity. He wants to live his life in light of what God would have for him. So look at verses 20 and through 26, the end of the chapter. We're thinking about living in light of misery, or living life in light of misery. He says, why is light even given to those in misery? Light, again, perhaps maybe a reference point to us. Why is life given to those in misery? And life is the bitter of soul. If this is all that life offers from Job's perspective, to those who long for death that does not come. He is a man that seems to be seeking death. He's talked about cursing his birth. He's talked about longing for it. And he's, someone who searches for it more than hidden treasure. And he's thinking about, death. Verse 22, who are filled with gladness and rejoice when they reach the grave. Outside of a fully developed understanding of the afterlife that we have in the New Testament that Job and others would not have had in the Old Testament. We think about a passage like in John chapter 14, that Jesus has gone to prepare a place for those who trust God. And he's gone to prepare a place so that we can be there where he is. That type of understanding would not have been fully developed in the Old Testament, in the Old Covenant. But from Job's perspective, what he sees as a better position to be in is not life, it's death. Because of the circumstance and the situation that he's experiencing. When they rejoice when they reach the grave, or who are filled with gladness when they rejoice when they reach the grave. Why is life given to a man whose way is hidden? whom God has hedged in. Remember that word hedged in? Isn't that what Satan said about Job? He said, yeah, the reason he serves you is because you built a hedge around him. Job is protected from you. But it could be that Job sees that from the opposite perspective. Now I am hedged in, it's preventing me from escaping. Escaping what it is that has brought such hardship to him. 24, he says, sighing comes to me instead of food. My groans pour out like water. What I feared has come upon me. And I just wonder what he's thinking. He's thinking in line of the prevalent idea in their day and time, in their culture. Remember we talked about it, that God prospers the righteous and punishes the wicked. So he said, what I feared has come upon me, what I dreaded has happened to me. Could it be that perhaps he's being a little introspective work as to why is this coming upon me? Because what does he know is the end result of it, or what is the result of his current situation is, in verse 26, he doesn't have three things. He doesn't have peace, he doesn't have quietness, and he doesn't have rest. The only thing that he experiences is turmoil, day after day. And we could perhaps say, night after night. What a difficult situation to be in. It sounds as though that he's searching for perhaps death. Is he contemplating suicide? And if he does that would devastate his integrity, right? Although, what was his wife's advice?
Curse God and die.
Curse God and die. You end it, which would be that. But Job, his lament reflects more than anything just the test that God has allowed him to be put through, and in light of what God knows about Job, and that is that he's not following after God just because of the gifts that come with it. He's following after him because he loves him. So it's a very dark chapter to me. It's pretty devastating. And I hate to hear the details of what someone is going through, and emotionally and mentally what they're thinking. And you would like to say, well, according to chapter 2, verses 11 through 13, you'd like to think, well, help is on the way, because the friends are coming. We'd like to think that they're coming to comfort him, and perhaps they're thinking that they are coming originally to comfort him. But Job himself even refers to them later on in the book. You guys are miserable comforters. Their advice, their assessment of his situation, their interpretation in light of the standard idea that God blesses the righteous, punishes the wicked. It's a very practical interpretation. Job, you were blessed when you were righteous. Now you are sitting in ashes and scraping sores and flesh from your body. We can't even hardly recognize you. There must be sin in your life to bring this type of retribution from God. But that's where we pick up. As we pick up into next week, we're going to see Eliphaz is going to be the first to speak to him. And throughout the next several chapters, his three friends have an opportunity to encourage him. Unfortunately, what we're going to see is that it ends up being more critical than comforting. And then Job has a chance to respond to them in light of that. And as we work through that, we'll think about the role that each person plays. Eliphaz build that, and I think, or is it, and then Zophar, as he comes to speak to him in Job's response to them, we'll see what type of role they play in relation to the questions presented, in relation to the principle, the main, the perceived idea, the practical way of life, blessing to the righteous, punishment to the wicked. The way that they bring that, they discern his life in relation to that.